Africa, and whatever. So they went through a lot of things and all details, but we just kind of like we're coming up to speed. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Just on everything that's going on. But it was really a productive meeting, and we're going to be launching. We're going to be launching the Smicha program.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and it's going to work in two phases. It's like one phase would be going through like leadership training,
Mhm.
right? And then the stage after that would be, to become a rabbi.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever. It's a whole thing. But we're going to talk more about it. But that's what was going on there. What was I going to say? Okay, so a little bit just okay. So we're going to go back and we're going to go deeper in this understanding of preemptive war, right? And what does the Torah say about it? Obviously, war is a big topic, but I don't want the war and all that stuff to overshadow also other things that are going on right now, right? It's the fact that we're in Adar. This is a time of miracles. This is a time of amazingness, and it is a great time for Israel in the United States to be dealing with these conflicts because the energy is definitely on our side at this time of the year, right? There's certain times of the year where it's favorable if we have to go to court or we got to do anything to do with judgment with the non-Jewish world. There's certain favorable times to that, right? And then there's times where it's not so great, right? So now would be a time to start new things, to challenge judgment, being a month of Adar. So on that level, it's great, but it's even greater than that, right? It's a dynamic where we can, you know, recreate ourselves, right? You could elevate to higher levels. You can experience things that you didn't know existed, right? And so that's where we're at right now. And any thoughts, any ideas before we go forward?
Uh, no, I'm good. I might share something later. What we learned yesterday,
Mm,
concerning clock, but we can get going.
okay, well, I definitely want to hear that. All right.
Oh yeah,
Before,
Rob. And
go
one
ahead.
more thing. Today is my wife's birthday. Her
Oh
Hebrew birthday
wow,
is on the
Mazel Tov.
27th. Is her Hebrew birthday is on the 27th of Adar, but her secular birthday is today.
Wow. Wait, so six, so she's Pisces?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh wow, 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 wow. Pisces, they have like really intense dreams.
Yeah, I always try to talk to her about dreaming, a lot because I'm a have dreams, and she's definitely a dreamer.
Yeah,
She has.
yeah.
I can see her spiritual gifts for sure.
Yeah, Moshe Rabbeinu's a dar, and Purim was in the dar. Because they say, you can learn a lot from personalities. But I want to just say Mazel Tov on that, and this should be like the greatest year of her life, only just with excitement and great health and parnasa and love and unconditional love and shalom bayit and just only goodness.
For
So,
sure.
so I want to just bring a really quick excerpt. I saw it, just really recently, and it was just kind of like touching on the last couple weeks of Adar. And I want us to not lose that idea, because right now we're learning about the Holocaust of preemptive war, which is important because we got to see everything through the lenses of Torah, right? But I don't want to take away from the spirit. Okay, so with that being said, I'm just going to be, it's only 2 minutes, so it's a segue point. All right. All right, yeah, we got that. Okay.
We know that there's a halacha, the Gemara brings down this halacha, that shoylin v'darshin, the Hilchos Pesach, koilin lePesach, shloishim yom. We begin learning Hilchos Pesach 30 days before Pesach. The Beis Yosef brings in Siman Tav Chaf Tes 3 reasons for this. But what I would like to share with you this morning is the amazing reason of Tor Barekes in our Chaim Siman Tav Chaf Tes. Tor Barekes is one of my favorite svarim, written by Reb Chaim HaKoyen of Aram Tsoiva of Syria, a student of Reb Chaim Vital. He's buried in Lavarno, in Leghorn, and he says something fantastic. We know Zeh Le'uma Zeh Asa Lekim. The way Hashem created the world, two corresponding forces. Chazal say Caesarea and Yushalayim. When one falls, the other rises. We learn that from the pasuk Imala Hacharava. Therefore, as soon as Purim is finished and Haman fell and his sons fell, the sons of Haman are the 10 forces of Tumah in the world, like we find in Tikkunei Zayar. Therefore, when Hashem begins to break the staff of the Rasha, immediately we begin to ascend in Kedusha. When the Rasha falls, we ascend. Therefore, we need to capitalize immediately upon the downfall of Haman. We begin to ascend in order, the Torah Bereka says, to claim the final 15 days of Adar back into Kedusha. So, the reasoning of learning Hilchos Pesach before 30 days, says Torah Barekes, Siman Tav Chav Tes, page Hey in the Torah Barekes, is as Haman is falling, it is our time to rise and to ascend, and we do so by learning Hilchos Pesach 30 days before and claiming the last 15 days of Adar. Wishing everyone a wonderful Zman, looking forward to the Yemei Nisan.
Anyways, so it's just a little, it's a kind of a chizuk point, in just being in that mindset of just understand like this now is the time of holiness. Now there is a tradition to start learning the halakha or Hilchot Pesach, right? Which we have started the process, right? But we are learning halakha. We are learning halakha, and we will get more in depth in it. But where we're at right now is building where we're going. Right, because those details that they're learning at Sefer are obviously very important, but we're creating the head for that, right? We're creating the direction for that, right? And this direction is being able to see reality from the frame of the Torah, right? To look around us and to see souls and to see lights, to be able to see all the different aspects of creation and to understand it, in terms of the desires that were created by Hashem in the beginning of creation. Anyway, so with that being said, I want to go back into this amazing conversation. So the thing is, and we talked about it yesterday towards the end, we're going through a halakhic discourse, right? And the halakhic discourse is basically applying the pasukim and the rationale of the sages to life. Right? That it's not just something we learn over there and it's just, it's my thing, I'm really into it. It's like Harry Potter. Like, I know this guy, his sister loves Harry Potter. Like she reads it on Shabbos all the time, right? So it's not like an imaginary world that you go into and then you come back out. Right? This is life, right? And so when we're reading halakhic discourse on any topic, right now we're dealing with preemptive war. Why? Because we are at war, right? So we want to be able to rationalize this from a godly perspective. But more importantly, is to see and look at the Rabbi Bleich, Rabbi David Bleich, Yehuda David Bleich, and to be able to look at how his discourse is, right? How he writes, how he's explaining this, and to build our understanding of how, if we wanted to articulate something, how would we go about articulating it, in terms of message of the sage? All right, so let's keep going. All right, let's go. Okay, here we go. All right, so we're back in it. We're back in this whole conversation. So this is section 2. The concept of preemptive war and the situation in which such military actions may be undertaken, even within the extent of the war started by a king, right? It's with Mehila Emet Reshut. Right, and so he says, is the subject of considerable controversy among rabbinical commentators. Okay, so what is the issue here? He says the concept of preemptive war and the situations in which a military actions may be undertaken as a result of, say, a leader making it, is a big issue, right? Because it's like, was he right? Was he not right? Because there's been, a lot of Jewish kings and different things throughout history. Where if you went down every single military intervention that every Jewish king, every Jewish general has enacted, were they kosher or not? Right? That's what I'm hearing the question. A number of conflicting views center around the correct understanding of Rambam's foundation of this concept. So Rambam creates a problem for the later commentators. He says it might be appreciated. It may be it may be anticipated. It might be anticipated that in deciding between conflicting views of Rav Yehuda and the sages, the normative halakhic ruling would be in accordance with the majority opinion. With majority opinion, i.e., in accordance with the opinion of the sages. Therefore, Rambam formalizes the halacha in somewhat puzzling. All right. So we go back just really quickly over the issue with Rav Yehuda in the sages, right? So Rav Yehuda, not to be mistaken with Rav Yehuda, who we're reading by, who wrote this, as you call it, a Pesach per se, and this overview. And so, okay, so this is the issue. This is the issue. Okay, so the issue, he's saying like this, that when it comes to determining what is a proper justified war from the frame of reshut, right, which is a key. He says that the rabbinical commentators have conflicted views around understanding the concept itself, right? And they have a big discussion on what does Rambam actually mean when he lays down this concept. And then he further says it might be anticipated that in deciding the views between Rav Yehuda and the sages, the normative halakhic ruling would be with the majority opinion, in accordance with the sages. Therefore, Rambam's formulation of halakha is somewhat puzzling, right? Okay, so we're about to see. This thing is deep, man. I didn't know it was so deep. So, okay, so he's saying like this. So he's saying that the main issue is, and this is halakhic discourse. This is how it works. We would sit here for days trying to understand this stuff. Go and get some coffee and then come back and try to understand some more, and then go and have some rolls and anyway, and get fat while you're in yeshiva. All right. So, anyways, so the point is just saying. So you're trying to figure this out, right? So the issue is that the sages, most of them, the main source that they go to understand a war that's created by a king, a Jewish king, the main source that they go to is Rambam. Okay? Now there's a big discussion on what Rambam's position is. We don't know what it is yet. Okay? Unless you already know Rambam. I don't know this Rambam. Right? So I have a feeling they're gonna show it to us in any second, right? But I want us to understand the issue. The issue is that the sages go to this source for a definition. By them, they have machlokas, they have argument around what the exact definition of what is being described by the statement, right? And on top of that, the idea is to say that whatever Rambam's opinion is, the author of this particular overview that we're reading, right? He also brings a situation that it gives the impression that Rambam somehow does not rule in the favor of the sages, right? He's not ruling. He has some different opinion. I don't know. He says the king may first wage may only just a king. So, anyways, the point what we're trying to do as we go forward, we're going to try to understand what is the issue around what Rambam said and how that has played a role on various interpretations on what a war is that's decided by a king. Okay? So now what we're doing, we're about to read what Rambam's rule is. Okay? So this is what we're doing now, okay? the king may the king may first wage only a metilat emet mitzvah. What is a metilat mitzvah? Me'ila mitzvah, me'ila emet mitzvah. He says it is the war against the 7 nations, the war against Amalek, and a war to deliver Israel from enemies who has attacked them. Therefore, he must wage a war of Mehila and Met Reshut, which is there. He says thereafter he may wage a war of Metila Reshut, which is a war against the other people, in order to enlarge the borders of Israel and to enhance its greatness and prestige. Yeah, that is kind of it's different. Okay, so why is that different, right? And so normally, if we were like if we were going to go to that next level, we would start writing down the different perspectives on this law because we would find the difference. What is Rambam saying different than what the sages in the Mishnah say, right? Because the sages in the Mishnah say that okay, the war that is a mitzvah, a God commanded war, they bring he says that in essence it's this dynamic of obviously self-defense, obviously or it's to take out there's an argument essence, but the other level of war is taking someone out or taking people out because they may rise up against Israel, and to deliver Israel from and also to deliver Israel um, from from salvation, right? To give deliverance to Israel, right? Like meaning they're in a bad situation, they got to get out. Which you could say is like self-defense, but I think that's maybe a little bit different, right? So, or it could be understood. So the point is like this. But here Rambam is saying he's being very specific on what a war, a deraisa, a war that's a mitzvah, a war that's God commanded. He's saying it's a war against the 7 nations, he said it's the war against the 7 nations, the war against Amalek, and a war to deliver from their enemies. All right, so let's see what he says. But right now, I'm just saying there's a difference with what Rambam is saying by specifying the 7 nations in the war of Amalek. Specifically, that's an issue. And then when he says the idea of reshut, he says basically it is to expand the borders. Okay, so let's see what the rabbi who wrote this overview is his response to that. To explain to me the issue. So we're trying to understand why did other people who went to this have a discussion or disagreement about what actually Rambam means, and then because they made different decisions and wrote perspectives because of that. He said Rambam employs the term he says mehil emet mitzvah and mehil emet reshut in establishing dictums, categories in accordance with the Melikoler adopted by the sages. All right, so Rambam also creates categories, right? To create, to understand there's 2 different types of wars, right? Wars that are commanded by God, and then wars that a king commands. And he also wants to be in line with the language or the temperature of the sages of the Mishnah, who also use the same type of language, right? He says the sages. He says the sages. He says the sages. He says the sages. It will be remembered regarding the preemptive war to diminish the heathen so that they will not march against them, as being entirely in the nature of a discretionary war, and hence had no had no had no need to introduce the third via Mehilad To'ah in another order to distinguish between a preemptive war and a war of conquest of Canaan. He says, therefore, the Mehila Emed Hova is employed by Rav Yehuda in order to distinguish between the various commandment wars for preemptive war. So he's saying the standpoint of preemptive war. So he's basically, what he's doing now is that he's explaining that Rambam is in line with the sages. Okay, he's in line. He's using the same language, same dictum, this type of thing, right? And he says the sages will remember in regards to the preemptive war. This is what this idea of diminishing the other nations in order to in order to make sure they don't rise up against us. That's what the sages understand it, right? That's how the sages understand it, right? And he says, as being entirely in the nature of discretionary war, and hence no need to introduce the third via this. So he's saying, so that's what he's saying. So he's saying the sages' base concept on the war that is considered a mitzvah is a war that is ordained by God, and the way that it expressed that is a war that basically any war that has to do with the other nations and their ability to rise up or attack or whatever against the Jewish people, right? Doing that is a holy war. Now that's the war. Now, what Rav Yehuda does is brings another category to that preemptive war, and he says, well, it's not exactly like that, meaning it's not a war from a mitzvah, but it's a war. It's a war that's also preemptive, but it's preemptive on the frame of a king, right? And so he says, in order to distinguish between a preemptive war and a preemptive war of the conquest of Canaan, right? The term Metilat Hova is employed by Rav Yehuda in order to distinguish the various commanded wars from the preemptive war, right? I hope we're following this. Is good. We're doing the best we can, because normally what we would, to make it easier, we would be writing this down on a notebook, but it's okay. I mean I have it. I mean, once you get used to it, you organize in your head. But it's saying, so Rambam's foundational is puzzling on two accounts. Rambam fails to state that the preemptive war are discretionary and hence can be undertaken only by a monarch with the approval of the Sanhedrin. Indeed, Rambam completely fails to rule upon or in record the record statute of preemptive war. Among the Mehilat Mitzvah, Rambam posts a category of war of which there is no apparent Talmudic reference: to deliver Israel from an enemy. Okay, so what is Rambam? Rambam says, let's go back to Rambam's statement, right? Whoa. Okay, so Rambam says, first he says a king can only wage. He says a king may first wage war. A king may only first wage only a Maliyah Emet mitzvah. What is a Maliyah Emet mitzvah? It is a war against the seven nations, a war against Amalek, a war to deliver Israel from the enemy who has attacked them. Okay, so that's one thing right there, right? So let's just stay on that point. Now, the sages, right? The sages over here, right? The sages understand, the sages will be remembered regarding the preemptive war to diminish the heathen, that they shall not rise up against them. Right? So Rambam, his point on this is different. Right? He says specifically Amalek and specifically enemies who attack them, right? Hold on. All right, so the issue that they have over here is like this. Rambam's statements are relatively vague, right? They're relatively vague. They say these points, they in a way are not exactly like the sages, even though they use the same language. This is the problem. So he's using a similar language to the sages, which would make you compare his statement to the sages or seeing how in line they are, right? By definition of using the same words. But he doesn't, he's not descriptive, he's very vague, and he doesn't even deal with other general principles that the sages are dealing with. For example, he says Rambam's formulation is puzzling on two accounts. One is Rambam fails to state that the preemptive wars are discretionary and hence can be undertaken only by a monarch with the approval of the Sanhedrin. Right? This is for the aspect of that. Indeed, Rambam completely fails to rule upon or to record the status of preemptive war. Right? So he's not dealing with preemptive war, right? He's dealing with Amalek and he's dealing with people who are attacking the Jews. And he said, so he's not dealing with that. Second issue is when it comes to the issue of Mehilat Mitzvah, Rambam posts a category of war for which there is no apparent Talmudic reference, a war to deliver Israel from its enemies. Okay, fine. He says the facial solution to both problems might be found where it to be assumed that Rambam used the phrase a war to deliver Israel from an enemy. Rambam used the phrase a war to deliver Israel from his enemies is intended to simply as a reformulation for the Gemara's concept of a preemptive war. However, such interpretation of Rambam's statement cannot be sustained for a number of reasons. Okay, so it's getting more technical. Okay, first of all, let's just stop here for a second. We can continue on, but I just want to. What are your thoughts at where you're at with this?
I mean, it's making me think on a few levels of like, for one, the importance of a king being the one who can, facilitate a war. What is a king? You know that Rabbi Hamelech was a prophet. He was connected to Sanhedrin. He was one of the highest level of Torah scholarship. So the Ruach HaKodesh is pouring through him. So if he, obviously you have a mitzvah to make a war, okay, fine. You understand? So Hashem give you the command. But if it's not a command, then how can we be sure that the king is not waging war based on, emotional pulls or, something that's not connected to Torah? Is it kosher? Is it the right move to make? So that's why I'm kind of gaining the facilitation of how these decisions are made and how they can be carried out, because it could be a concern if a Jewish king were to misuse the talent, the power that he has. In a sense, it becomes, egotistical, and now the Jewish nation becomes a nation of conquest instead of a nation of peace. And that's kind of what I'm gaining from it on that level, because it's very technical. I'm trying to just hold on what I can kind of grasp.
Yeah, exactly. And all this, you're getting used to it. It's a certain type of dialogue. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the point. But the key point here is definitely what you just said, but it's also the element of of it's also the element of the textual issue here, right? Because we are learning a perspective through text. Like we don't get a chance to talk to Rambam, right? So we're just learning his perspective on text. So based off of the way that Rambam writes it, right? Like you're saying, it's not clear what he's saying because he's not giving clear instructions. He's not saying, okay, well, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. And then some of the issues that were taken account in generations prior to him, he's not really even referencing those, right? And so when you come up with a halakhic ruling or you want to explain to someone, okay, this is why this should be done this way, you can't just come up with it off the top of your head. Right? That's what none of the rabbis do that. There's no legitimate rabbi who's ever written a Pesach that says, hey, I just had this inspiration and done it. Now they've had divine inspiration fueling them with information, but even that information was all sourced. You know what I'm saying? Or had references to sources, whether it was from Mount Sinai, as you hear a lot in Rambam's language, or you hear like the Beit Yosef, and an angel inspired him to write a lot of things, but obviously it's sourced, right? So the point is just saying that, so none of the rabbis come up with things on their own. But however, we do go to our sources, and then we go and make sense of their words and try to apply it in other situations. So he's saying in this particular situation is while we're trying to understand the concept of preemptive war, the way that the sages have went in the past to come to conclusions on how to make rulings are from a line of traditions. Part of that line or main line in terms of this particular area is Rambam. He's considered an authority by many people, right? Some people don't hold by Rambam. But in the case of this discussion, many people do. And so he's saying that because of the way that Rambam's wording was, right now we're only dealing with text. Right, and that's what I'm saying. It's not in front of us, so it's not the same, but it's still building the thought, right? Because of the wording, right? It's like a person gets a contract, right? The contract says, on the 15th, on the 15th, you're going to get paid, right? You're going to get paid X amount of money on the 15th, right? So, okay, fine. And he said, okay, you accept it, you sign it, right? But the contract doesn't say the 15th of what month. Now, you can assume that 15th meant this month, right? Because you're there and it makes sense and you labored or whatever it is, and you should be getting paid this month. But he may understand it to mean like, no, it means 15th of next month, right? Why would I pay this month? I'm paying next month. Or 15th in the beginning of next quarter, right? So what we want to do is be clear about exactly what the language is that's being said inside of the text, because through that language, we can have an understanding what the other sages were going through when they were trying to extrapolate from this. Because if you compare the Mishnah, or you compare the discussion in the Talmud, right, about the same issue of preemptive war, or the difference between a war from the Torah and the war that's given, right? So you can say, hey, they use the example early. Some of the things that King David did, right, when he expanded borders, will be under the concept of reshut, right? And then there's another dynamic with the wars that Joshua went through, right? That were directly commanded by God, right? Or Moses, right? Whatever. The point is just saying these dynamics, or you could say, Shimoni Levi, right? That was reshut, right? That wasn't divine. Even the Father was against. So the point is just saying that. So what we're trying to understand is what Rambam is saying in conjunction with that. Now, maybe you could argue, maybe Rambam's not even going off of that. I don't know. But the point is saying that that's what we're trying to come to. And this is an insight into how halakhic rulings are created, how people go into the sources, right? And to be able to come to conclusions on how we should do this or do that, right? Because right now we're dealing with preemptive war, right? Before 1948, it wasn't such an issue, right? For Jews for thousands of years. Now it's an issue. How do the Jews deal with this? We're battling and fighting as Jews. People want to kill us because we're Jews. How do we deal with that? So what we're trying to see is the line of reasoning that created the discourse that we have today. And what Rabbi Bleich is bringing to us is this context of saying that the main source, right, the clog in the sink in terms of where people split on is Rambam, because people went to him and his source, right? Hold on. Does that make a little bit? Does that add to understanding what we're doing?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And this is what pretty much we spend most of our day doing in yeshiva, right? Is the inside of the Talmud. It's just pretty much this, and going through cases and this and sources and this type of things. Obviously, there's other. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a quick question. So, like, when do we apply like the 4 levels of learning? Part of this with this, because like For example, he brings out the seven nations, right? We could look at the seven Midot. He brings out the war of Amalek. We could look at a war against Safek, a war against doubt. When do we turn the lens on that end? You
Yeah,
get what I'm trying to say?
yeah. That is definitely there,
Uh,
but that's definitely there. But even when it comes to the functionality of the
mhm.
spherot, right, and all the different levels of connection of the spherot, in order for a person to move that and departmentalize that in their brain, they have to have these foundational points to do it, right? This structure is not just like a structure in terms of halacha, but it's a
Right.
structure. It's a structure on different parts that are seemingly separate, or different parts that seemingly are in conflict, right? And being able to reconcile those different things, and those different parts in this case are legal terms, right? But when you go into the spheros, you're just replacing those legal terms and you're just putting the light on top of it. But if you don't, but you have to, yeah, but it's all the levels. That's why the sages stress like knowing, having at least a base. You know what I mean? Now, does that mean, oh, I got to know Torah Kula before I learn Kabbalah? Of course not. But the point is just saying that both sides of the bring there, because the thing is, once a person has that structure, and that's one of the beauties of going to yeshiva first and then learning Rabbi Pinchas, because then it was like, oh, okay, well, now I learned a lot of general themes by the Kabbalah Center, what I mean, growing up, right? General themes like the Hesed, the world, whatever. But when I went to yeshiva and then I learned the technical aspects of the tradition, right? That allowed me to kind of like computerize my brain in a lot of ways, right? And through that computerization of my brain, then when I went by Rapinkas, I was able to just kind of like take that information and plug it in here, plug it in there, plug it in there, plug it in there. And that's how classic Torah learning goes, right? And the more you go into the Sod and the Kabbalah, the more you see, that this is all Kabbalah, right? Because at
Mhm.
the end of the day, what are we talking about? We're saying that where is the light force and where is it not? Where's the energy? Where is it not? Where's the Shekhinah? Where is it not? If I eat this food, I disconnect from this energy force because this food does not contain that energy.
Mhm.
The same process exists for this case, preemptive war. If I'm doing this, where is the connection to the kedusha? Where is it not? What is the rationale? So these are not laws; these are ways of explaining energies and how they manifest, right? Because the whole point is a mitzvah is a connection to the light force of the Creator. The light force of the Creator comes into our neshama that's made up of the 613 parts, which is the body, which is the world that we're created in, right? So the laws themselves are not laws in a way that we see by American standards or some other type of organizational standard, but rather the laws on the surface level are that, but on the internal levels are really just kind of like visors for where their energy's at. So when I look at, say, a military situation, which is a big thing, I want to be able to say, it's like, where's the kedusha in this situation, and where's the avera in the situation? Where's the light? Where's the separation at? Right? And so it's a general thing, but there's other things like there's veganism that I want to learn veganism, and there's a few other stuff, surgeries, dynamics with other things. But the point is, I'm not saying we have to do them, per se together, but I'm just saying in general, it's just saying that the rules are directing us towards energy. The rules and we're going through the process of the discussion because everything that's talking about is an expression of light. Every idea. So I don't know. Does that explain a little bit or no?
No, it does, and it kind of flows into something I wanted to kind of ask you is with like the Yeshiva Sanhedrin, right? Like, and what I'm about to say might be a little, I guess, radical in thought, but I can only go based off like my own personal experience, and I guess we kind of relate in a sense. It's because we both came into Torah Mitzvot through the Sod, pretty much in a way. Being introduced to Kabbalah, through the Rabbi, Yehuda Berg. Rabbi Burke, and it's like it's interesting because like Pardes, sold is the last part. So it's like you go through the technicalities, whatever. And then you get once you get 40 years old, you learn Kabbalah. But in our case, it was kind of the opposite way around. And I'm kind of thinking, through my personal experience, being introduced to Kabbalah from that was my initial like boom. That was the first thing I pretty much learned. It gave me the ability, I guess, in a sense of perception to view everything the way that you were just, relating it, seeing the light in every single situation. It was spirit first and then body in a way. And that's how I kind of view it. And I'm like, maybe that gave me the inspiration, Baruch Hashem, to want to continue, like, let me go to Talmud, let me go to Mirror, let me get the technicalities because I'm already, my initial is the light. It's not body then like it's not technical now I work my way up. It's like no, it's light first and it's like progressively back down. It's like top down instead of down up. If that makes sense. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a model for everyone, but I know for myself it worked perfectly. Baruch Hashem, like it makes so much sense. Like now when we're going through Talmudic discussions and we're getting technical, I'm searching for a light. It's like okay, that means that, but what's the that's the external layer, what's the internal layer? Like it just kind of helped my perception, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I hear that. It made me think about years ago. I remember when I was actually at the Kabbalah Center. This guy, I think his name was Abraham. I think his name was. He's an Israeli guy. But I remember when I started to go to morning prayers, right? And I didn't even know they had morning prayers. And there's a whole process, like how I started going to Shabbat. I went to a dinner. I told you the story. I went to a dinner, and then next thing you know, I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. The next morning, and I wanted to go back to another dinner. I went to another dinner, and then I realized that they have daytime services. And I started going to daytime services, but I would only go to the lecture and hear the lecture and be like, okay, I'm out. I don't want to do the services. What's this Jewish stuff? Blah blah. Blah, I'm out, right? And eventually, hearing the Torah open, right? And just looking back on that, it's like, wow, like look at myself right now and to think about when I was seeing at the Kabbalah Center and seeing them open the Torah for the third time and singing, these songs and just feeling this overwhelming light. And to think that those experiences drove me to where I'm at now. But the point I wanted to make, and we can end it right here on this point. Um, you know, the thing is to say that I remember when I was at the Kabbalah Center, this guy Abraham was there, and and it was when I started to, and then I learned that there was week time prayers, week time prayer. I'm like, wow, like, because I was on such highs after getting used to Shabbat that I was like, man, it was such a drop for me. And then I found out, like, wow, you could do it's like a Shabbat type of a thing, because everything was Shabbat for me. You know what I mean? Everything was like in the Shabbat avoda. Like the light of Shabbat is what built my Jewish experience in many ways. Looking at it in retrospect, talking to you today, because that was my first real Jewish experience, was going to Shabbat, other than going to Kabbalah classes or going to a kosher bagel place, right? It was like, it was Shabbat at the Kabbalah Center. But I remember this guy, Abraham, when I realized that there was morning prayers, I started going for like months, maybe even a year, maybe more than a year, I don't know. But I was just going there like every day, and this guy Abraham was like, why don't you put on the tefillin? They have extra tefillin. I was like, no, I'm cool. I don't need the tefillin. Blah 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 blah. Like I'm connecting. This whole thing and blah blah blah. Because that's where I'm at, right? What do I need tefillin for? And he says something to me, and and I really understand it. Like obviously more now than even then. He said, yeah. He said the difference between wearing a tefillin and not is the difference between being a spectator versus a player in the game, right? Like you said, you're here in you're here in you're here in the war room. You're here in the Beit Knesset, right? You're praying. You got they got the Sefer Torah out. You got your prayer book, the whole thing, right? And he says there's a group of men. All these men are unified in this way, and they're collectively bringing down this light together, right? And so the tefillin is the technology that they're using. And he was saying that um, and he was saying that, and he was saying that's how you plug in. That's how you're part of the group, right? And I never really understood that. You know what I'm saying? Because I came from like an Islamic background, and it was a group of men. We played together, but there was never really a talk about like collective consciousness or unification. It was like a unification because we all believe in God. And I'm not putting it down. I'm not saying there aren't schools of thought that may have that. It seems like an obvious thing, but it's just saying that at that time it was just like a relatively new idea. And I would say that the learning that I am bringing is not, and I'm not. You're not saying this, but I just because you said it, I want to clarify and say I'm not directing it towards you. I'm just saying as a general point, what we're doing is not per se what the Kabbalah Center was doing, because the Kabbalah Center's focus was very much about spreading the Zohar and the teachings of Rav Ashlag, right? And the idea that the teachings of Rav Ashlag in the research and development and awareness of the Zohar was in that spirit of, we haven't learned it together, but Rav Ashlag, he talks about this. He talks about the fear of the Kabbalah being lost and people being turned off by it, and how essential it is for for the redemption and everything, and the whole thing, right? He goes into it. He like pours his heart out. He talks like cries. It messes him up just thinking about that thought. But the point is just saying that. The point is just saying that. So that was their focus, right? Now, we're in a kind of a different situation with the Rabbanut and myself from the standpoint that we have to build people that can be in the game, right? Right? Being a spectator is cool, right? There's guys, they know, they get it, they know the language. I have a friend of mine, guy, whatever, I'm not even going to go into detail. Maybe he listens to my share, but he knows who he is. He's out of the country. And he's not living righteously. And this guy, he knows a lot of Torah. He's great language skills, these types of things. We went to yeshiva together. And the thing is, he could be a player, right? But he took himself out of the equation. So now he could go maybe to the synagogue and go to Shabbat and do whatever, but he's a spectator. He's not in the game of Kedusha. So for me, I could teach, and other people, they teach Kabbalah all day long, and the students come and they get a high, and they have like, these big, crazy thoughts and these different levels and there's depths and that. Okay, fine. And that's true. And that is a level, right? And it's more of a level than the person who watches football and basketball and, watches politics and all that type of stuff. But the thing is, there's a whole nother way of thinking that's unique to you. There's a way of thinking that you have that no one else on planet Earth would ever have access to. And that is the Sod. The Sod is not the Sfirot. The Sod is not the Zohar. Those things are merely tools to engage you into a world that does not have words, right? And that world that you go into that does not have words, right, allows you to tap into the inner aspects of yourself that you have no navigation tools to reach to, right? And so in order to get to that place, you have to know how to activate it yourself, right? And you have to have the skills to be able to activate itself. And it goes with Midot. How many Midot classes did they give at the Kabbalah Center? You know what I'm saying? Okay, maybe a teacher set a point, work on this, work on that. But they didn't know what Musar is. They didn't know how to cleanse yourself. No, you learn some ideas as academic, you go home. And you come back the next day, you get more light and you go home. You're addicted to it. All right, very good. And people do that. And that's what a lot of people teach Kabbalah do. They just have students that are just high off of the Torah. And for me, it's just like, that's not the case. It has to be all the levels. It has to be authentic. The Masorah that built Rabbi Shimon, the same Masorah that built Rabbi Shimon, the same Masorah that built Rabbi Akiva, the same, Masorah that built Rabbi Nosson Finkel by the Mir Yeshiva, and Rabbi Schiller by Or Sameach. That same tradition, you deserve to have that tradition too. You know what I'm saying? Me too. Rabbi Pinchas teaches that same tradition. The guys who were by Rabbi Pinchas, some of those guys you saw in the pictures, those guys know Kabbalah. They know Kabbalah on the deepest levels. I'm talking about at the highest levels of rabbis, not because they. So anyway, so it's just important to see like the importance of you becoming a rabbi, you becoming a sage, right? And all the things that we're learning in the Kabbalah are just entry level. They're just entries for you. They're using these as meditations to climb into other worlds. You can do that too. And so all these things that we're learning, rabbinical discourses, this, the Musar, all these things, these are all the building blocks and all the sages that you'll learn by, all the sages that you'll learn. And I'm not saying it to you. I know you know this, right? Because you've been learning for a long time. But I'm just saying in general to other people that are listening to this conversation, because I'm talking to them too, right? Because, a person can go out and get Rabbi Ari Kaplan's book, Kabbalah Meditations. You know what I'm saying? All right, very good. But what about the midah? Why not be clean before you start using the holy names, right? Why not make sure you're clean? Why can't you get rid of your pride, your ego, your vanity? Rabbi Kaplan is just dealing with that one thing. Anyways, the point is just saying it's definitely positive, but it's important to know that there's an aspect of Torah that's taught outside that creates followers. And then there's another Torah on the inside that's taught to create leaders, right? And so that Torah that creates leaders, even the vast majority of Jews, and I'm talking about vast majority of them in the high 90 percentile, don't even know it exists. They just think this rabbi wrote this way because he's just great. He was born that way. Or this guy knows this because he just really worked hard and he read over and over again. No, these people are trained. They're trained with a certain Masorah that allows them to walk in front of you with extra light and say, hey, this is what the Torah means. Anyways, any thoughts, any reflections on those points?
No, I'm good. Just listening.
Yeah. So, anyways, so that's the thing. Hold on one second. All right, fine. All right, yeah. So yeah, and so that's that's the point on that dynamic in whatever. But the point is because once we get past the point of learning, then we got to get into the idea of prayer, right? And davening and properly davening these things, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to lead prayers, right? You know what I'm saying? Like this is like a whole thing. You know what I'm saying? So the Masurah and all these technical points, okay, yeah, they're important, but eventually, we're gonna have to go into prayer and go to meditations. And once you have these levels within yourself, then anyways, we'll keep going. We're gonna do something tonight with Rabbi Sachs on Lech Lecha. And throughout the day, I'm gonna have this link up so you could jump in or whatever because I'm gonna finish this halakhic discourse, but we're gonna finish up Lech Lecha tonight and then tomorrow Shabbos. So, anyways, we did a lot of Torah this week, a lot of new stuff. It's good. You gotta keep it fresh. Anyways, so B'vat Hashem tonight we'll continue on and keep pushing it and then go from there.